Hello, everyone, and welcome to my Substack. My name is Christina Previtt. I am a PT PhD that works in pelvic floor rehabilitation, and my research area is looking at pregnancy, postpartum exercise, and the pelvic floor. Today, what I wanted to do was do a little bit more of a deep dive into some areas of pelvic floor rehabilitation that just does not fit into a 60-second snapshot on a reel, to see if this is a way for me to disseminate information and communicate effectively in this space when snapshots of information just doesn't really give the true nuance that is needed for this type of discussion. Today, what I wanted to talk about was the use of our internal exam in pelvic rehab and what we know and don't know about that exam. When we think about how much pelvic floor rehabilitation has really grown in the last 20 years, it truly is incredible. And it came because of a variety of different situations, circumstances, and advocacy from individuals in our profession. One of the first things that made it more accessible for us to do pelvic floor rehabilitation in the community was some of the seminal work done by Jo Laycock in the early 2000s. She was the first to compare a digital or finger-based internal exam to manometry, which is a pressure exam where you basically insert a device that has pressure sensors on the side, and the squeeze of the vaginal walls against the pressure sensor gives us a number that correlates to the strength of the pelvic floor. Her work created a comparison and showed correlation between the digital exam on evaluation and manometry. She then created the perfect exam, which is our current gold standard in pelvic floor rehabilitation. Perfect stands for power, endurance, repetitions, fast, every count timed. It is a max strength. How long can you hold that max strength? E. How many times can you do that max strength hold for? R. A fast flicks, F, and then every count timed. This was so pivotal for pelvic rehabilitation because it removed technology barriers and made it very easy to bring pelvic rehab into the community, and with the advocacy of pelvic floor physical therapists to make sure that pelvic rehab was no longer under a medical directive needing to be supervised by a physician. This allowed a lot more access to pelvic floor rehabilitation. And we have seen the benefits of that today, where we are now seeing many women with pelvic floor dysfunction, pregnancy, postpartum, postmenopause, all seeking care for pelvic rehabilitation and avoiding potentially unnecessary medical interventions as a consequence of having that access. One of the things that we need to question, however, and what has not been done in the rehab space, is to really look at what we know and what we don't know based on the outcome of that exam. It is great to know that it compares to manometry, but as rehabilitation providers, the next step we need to know is, what does this evaluation tell us for the function of our client? And does this test differ from a person who does have pelvic floor symptoms versus those that don't? And so I'm going to share about a recent study that just came out that was looking at this exact question. So it was comparing the perfect exam to manometry and transperineal ultrasound in women with and without stress urinary incontinence. Reminder, stress urinary incontinence is leaking with higher amounts of pressure in the belly, which would be things like coughing, sneezing, lifting, etc. There was 51 women in the symptomatic group had stress urinary incontinence and 47 women in the non-symptomatic group. When they looked at the differences, what I'm going to be focusing on here is this comparison. What they did was they showed, was there true differences in the values when they had a person who was blinded to if they had incontinence or not when they evaluated the pelvic floor. What they saw was there was differences in power, endurance, and the fast flicks, but there was no difference in repetitions. Number one, what that means is that we are not getting useful information by using that repetitions. We do not, I teach a pelvic level 1 course through the Institute of Clinical Excellence. We do not teach the repetitions because this has been a consistent finding in the data that we do have, that repetitions does not discriminate between a person who's going to be symptomatic and a person who isn't. And I'm not going to do an evaluation that isn't going to give me any useful information. What that is showing is, from a power perspective, women with stress urinary incontinence tend to have lower strength and lower endurance compared to those without incontinence. What is really important here, and again, why this conversation becomes so nuanced, is first of all, there is a confidence interval around those humans. They do not overlap, so there is differences. But a 2.7 versus a 3.0 is almost impossible for us to differentiate, really, when it comes to our exam. And it's less than a 1 grade difference between those with and without incontinence. We have to think, how clinically meaningful is that when we're using a 5-point scale? And if you are a clinician who's working with individuals with incontinence, you know that you can have a person who isn't leaking until they're 5 miles into their run and have a 2 out of 5 strength, when you have a person with a 5 out of 5 strength who leak as soon as they start running. So what this is starting to show is that there is appearing to be a difference. That difference seems to be small, and we don't have a good opportunity, or right now a current good evaluation that says, okay, you have this on the perfect exam. Here is your risk for symptoms if you return to lifting or running or any type of exercise. And in the symptomatic group, 66% of them also had symptoms with lifting. So there was exercise related symptom profiles in the group or in the cohort that had stress urinary incontinence. What this is showing me is that we still have so much work to do in understanding what our evaluation is, what our evaluation means, and what information we are truly gaining around a person's functional readiness based on that evaluation. And in all reality, the answer is we don't really know. In our course, we talk about how 3 out of 5, and it coincides with this, greater than a 3 seems to be a good minimum strength threshold. And if a person has a less than 3, we're probably going to be doing some amount of pelvic floor strengthening in their exam. But we do not know anything about what those repetitions, et cetera, are doing in terms of our confidence in their ability to go back to different tasks or rehab or progress their rehabilitation. We still have so much that we need to learn about this. As a clinician, my 3 takeaways for you. Number 1 is kick out repetitions. It takes so much time, it doesn't give us any information, and it's not really that useful. So get rid of it. Power, endurance, and fast is enough. Number 2 is do not create arbitrary thresholds that a person has to make or meet before you allow them to go back to specific exercises, especially when we don't have the data to back us up. Number 3 is that it is important for us to focus on a person's functional capacity. I believe, my hypothesis is that in the coming years, we are going to see that functional evaluation, coordination of the pelvic floor and how it integrates into the core transfer system, that core canister of the abdominal wall, chest wall, pelvic floor, and low back, is going to be pivotally important. But until we take the time to zoom away from the pelvic floor in isolation and do research that really integrates the pelvic floor into the system at which it interacts all the time, we are going to be limited in our translation research, and it's really going to not help the clinicians that this research is hoping to help. Anyways, that was 10 minutes. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know if these videos are something you want me to continue to do. They are much easier when I'm talking through this research than trying to write it all out because it's complex and it's nuanced. So let me know if these videos are helpful, and I can't wait to talk more about this.